Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, our CFX Connections webinar today. We are very happy to have you join us. My name is Stephanie Lippy, and I'm the conference manager for Church Facilities Conference and Expo. And we do aim to provide your church with educational and networking opportunities in the areas of leadership, facilities and operations, and production technology. Today, we're going to discuss how to understand risk management to attract insurance companies. So during today's webinar, we do encourage you to use the chat options and the Q&A options to connect with other attendees or ask your questions. We will make sure that we stop and answer those questions as they come up. So feel free to try to make it as conversation-like as you want. Please also note that if any resources are discussed, we will provide all of those links on our webinars page, and you will be able to access that at churchfacilitiesexpo.com. Finally, a recording of today's webinar will be shared with each registrant within a few days. So it's my pleasure today to introduce to you to Luke Shipp. Luke has been in the insurance industry since 2004, working as an underwriter and working in different roles with 2 different Fortune 500 companies. Now he's a risk advisor with First Insurance Group located in Sylvania, Ohio, and he works with many not-for-profit and for-profit businesses. His experience working as an underwriter does help him to communicate clearly with clients and carriers to find the best and most competitive solutions. When not working, Luke enjoys spending time with his family and coaching youth sports. And as a little side note, Luke and I actually went to college together, so I know from a personal standpoint, he's a really great guy. So Luke, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie, and I'll send you the $20 in the mail later on for saying those nice things about me. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. So talking about risk management is something near and dear to my heart. No one ever intentionally goes into the risk management business. You just happen to fall into it. So as Stephanie alluded or mentioned, I did work for 2 Fortune 500 insurance companies for about 11 years. And now I've actually been on the agency/brokerage side for the last 6 years. So the skill set I bring is a little bit different than most other agents because the insurance lingo and discussion is a different language. I don't know if you've had that experience when you talk about that with your agents individually, but I know it can be taxing or challenging when 2 groups of people are talking 2 different languages to try and come to a means to an end to a solution. So my goal today is to give you some information that may make it better for you in those conversations, understand what insurance companies are looking for, and maybe even why some questions are asked throughout the process. Because I know if you're like a lot of the clients I work with, you get tired of filling out insurance applications. And I can assure you there is a reason for every single question that comes on those applications. And so feel free to use the chat box for any questions you have. I asked Stephanie to help moderate that for us, and we'll be happy to share those as we go. So we will jump right into it here. And all right, so agenda. What is the goal today? So really 2 main objectives. One, what do insurance companies look for? We'll touch on each of those main coverage line items and understand that liability comes with a lot of different coverages within there. That can be professional, just your standard trip fall insurance, umbrella insurance, as well as some abuse coverage as well, which a lot of carriers are still offering in today's climate. And then the second thing is, what can I do to get the best pricing for my members or parishioners, however you see fit. And then talk about risk control, maintenance updates, medical payments versus liability, which is a common misnomer in insurance, and some options for you to look at that can help reduce your costs and potentially help reduce your claims experience. So jumping right into it, what do insurance companies look for? So realistically, there are several key components for rating commercial property. COPE is a standard acronym that we use in our industry. It stands for construction, occupancy, protection, and exposure. So what type of construction is your actual building or the facility you operate of? Who occupies it? If it's solely you or if there are other tenants in the building as well, carriers like to know that. then what type of protection do you have? This isn't just your fire department, but this would include any local alarms or central station alarms that you may employ, which can always help your case as well. And then your overall exposure. And that comes down to what is the coverage amount that we're talking about when we're talking commercial property, be your building values and your contents values. So those are the four main things that develop the rating for the commercial property side. And the one area where insurance companies continue to focus on is the age of roof. A lot of times you have older buildings as houses of worship. And so understanding the roof and how recently that has been replaced or maintained is a key area for what I call acceptability to insurance companies. So if you have an older building and the roof hasn't been updated, you're starting to find a lot of carriers either choosing not to cover houses of worship for that specific reason, or they're going on what's called an actual cash value basis for the roof, which would depreciate the actual cost of the shingles if a windstorm or a hailstorm were to come through and damage your roof. And so what carriers like to see if that roof hasn't been replaced is understand what the maintenance program and plan is for that. Are you on a 2-year or 5-year window where you're budgeting and planning to replace it? Is money set aside? Are you planning to do it this coming spring or summer, depending on your geographic region, to understand what that looks like? So that is a key area that we find insurance companies not wanting to insure houses of worship is because of the age of the roof. And that is obviously if you own your own building. If you do not own your own building, then that can still come into play, but it's just not as vital of a component. And then overall, your maintenance plan program. Do you have a budgeted plan or a group who reviews the overall maintenance of the church? Do you have employees and staff who do that solely as their role or function? And it's really just to give the carriers an insight as to how well is your property maintained, taken care of, and what is your feasibility to be able to take care of some of the small things that come up before they could potentially become bigger problems. So kind of in the same breath there, the two things carriers look at when it comes to claims, and that gets into your maintenance plan program, is frequency and severity. And the saying is that the frequency of small, minute claims bred severity, meaning the severe one is going to happen. So the more we can control the smaller incidental claims, the better opportunity for the severity challenges to be covered by insurance companies before you may have to go to outside of a standard market. So just some things to keep in mind there when you're focused on your commercial property that can definitely help you understand that conversation when you are filling out renewal applications. And then liability coverages. So we're going to branch off to a couple areas here. And feel free, again, ask any questions. Would like for this to be more of a conversation than just a dissertation on all things insurance. But liability coverage, so they want to understand proper maintenance of the premise and then vendor management. And so a little bit different than the maintenance on the property side. Me living in Ohio, obviously we get a lot of ice and snow. And so depending where you're at, having a good snow removal plan, and if you are using an outside vendor for that, understanding what insurance they do have in place if something were to occur. So the challenge becomes, and I see this in several other nonprofits that I work with, while the members of your house of worship have the best interest at heart for your institution, it can create somewhat of a challenge if they're the ones wanting to do the snow removal, because any issues that do arise could still come back on you as your challenge. So we do see a lot of times that just understanding what the risk reward is, it's great that the members of the congregation want to help out and provide that service to their house of worship. But sometimes, and unfortunately, we have seen claim instances where that comes into play. So that segues into risk transfer. So not just your snow removal contractors or lawn and landscaping contractors, but this would go for anyone outside of your house of worship that you hire to come in and do work in your facilities, Or if you own a building and you do lease some of that space out to tenants as well, understanding what coverages are required that are built into the lease agreement, and or what are the requirements you're putting on when you do select vendors who do come into your premise. Because at the end of the day, all people know is that they're coming to your house of worship, and they may not know all of those contractors you do or don't hire. So you're going to be named in any potential lawsuit that may come up. So it's just making sure you're doing business with people who have the proper protection in place, that if something bad enough did happen, you have means of recourse to have your insurance company go back after them for the retribution for the damage they may have caused. Background checks. And so this kind of goes into the
Luke, I want to interrupt you for a second. I do have a question specifically regarding churches. So you talked about being careful with your volunteers that are helping with stuff.
Yep.
Are you saying that churches should not have any volunteers helping with that, or how do you maintain that part of a ministry or that part of the church and be able to do that well?
Yeah, so it's not saying you should or should not do that. It's just understanding some of the challenges that can arise when you have people just out of the good of their heart wanting to do that, but bad things can happen. So you just have to understand what that potential risk is. It's not saying don't do it. It just understand what some of the challenges are that could come up.
Okay, just have a plan in place and be ready.
Exactly, just understand what those implications are.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So kind of staying along that same breadth with working with volunteers, background checks, and then business practice and working with minors. I kind of put these hand in hand. Obviously, any employees, you would want to do background checks, and then you would want to considering doing them on a regular basis. We all believe people have the best interests at heart, but a quote I tend to work with clients on is, I trust everyone. I just need to verify what they're telling me is the truth. So it's just simply a verification process to protect the members of your house of worship. So running those background checks, whether it be an employee or volunteers, and I'll even break it down a little further, and I'd say more specifically volunteers who are working with minors in any capacity. Understanding what that history is, yes, it's an added cost of doing business, but it is something that you could consider doing to help provide some added protection. And if you have questions around that, I'd urge you to ask your insurance company, because a lot of times those carriers do partner with vendors to offer a reduction or a reduced cost background check and or MVR, motor vehicle report pulling for those individuals. So you can always check with your carrier to see if they have anything set up that could help you. And then business practice working with minors. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention this. Just having some best practice plans in place, never having one-on-one contact with minors, whether that is you in the ministry and or your volunteers who breaking out youth groups, making sure you always at least have 2 adults to 1 minor in that presence, because what I always say is you're not worried about what you're going to do or your volunteers or your employees are going to do, but it's potentially what others could do. And it doesn't take a true claim to create or a true act to create an insurance claim. It just takes one person saying one thing, and then you're in a position to have to defend yourself. So implementing some of those best practices when you are working with minors, never leaving an adult and a child alone together can really go a long way. And you'll typically see that on a lot of your supplemental applications coming from your insurance company as well. Teams and sporting events. This can be a big wide open thing, specifically, in the Catholic faith with CYO. There's sports teams all over the place for those, and I know a lot of other houses of worship that do very, very similar things. What I always recommend to clients is to make sure you have a proper waiver that has been reviewed by an attorney. While a lot of times that may not hold up in the court of law, it is just another tactic to be able to make sure parents and children understand what is being signed within that course of them participating in a sporting event, either on your premise or off your premise, while representing your house of worship. And so understanding what the liability is around kids, any claim that happens to a minor under the age of 18 where there is bodily injury involved, that claim actually stays open until they're the age of 25. So that can be a very, very long-term effect if you have 8 to 10-year-old children in a sporting event and there happens to be some bodily injury because of something you did or did not do. That can impact your house of worship for a very long period of time. And so understanding how those things come up and what you can do to protect yourself, I'd urge you to talk with an attorney about what the best practice might be for that. And then the same goes with schools. And I know I'm hitting home this minor discussion because it is such a big challenge that we're seeing in today's environment with nonprofits, specifically anyone who does work with children. It is a great cause, but making sure you have all of those best practices in place to protect yourself from any potential suit or discussion is vitally important. So I'm going to pause for 30 seconds, take a drink of water here. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask.
Must be doing a spectacular job there, Luke.
Spectacular job or something, Stephanie, right? So what do insurance companies look for on the auto side? And this is whether you own any autos or you don't own autos. This comes into play because there's a coverage called hired and non-owned. So that would be any vehicle other than your own vehicle as a house of worship that may be used in the course of business. And so I know the course of business term can mean a lot of things. That's anything from running errands, running to the post office, running to the bank, to transporting parishioners to and from retreats, or anything else you can think of along those lines. And so when we talk about individuals using their own vehicles and or the house of worship's vehicles, some things to look at from a driver acceptance and verification. MVRs, that stands for your motor vehicle report. In the state of Ohio, you can actually do a free 2-year look back for anyone. So if you're not willing to incur additional costs, I'd recommend you check with your State Bureau of Motor Vehicles to see if they offer that free 2-year look back to at least give you some idea as to what their driving history is. If they are utilizing their own vehicle and they plan to have other members of the house of worship travel with them, understanding what coverage they have in place if they are using their own vehicle. Do they carry insurance? So I'm going to provide a nerd statistic for insurance. In the state of Ohio, roughly 17% of drivers are not insured at all. And the state minimum limits in Ohio are $25,000 for any one occurrence, or one person, $50,000 for any one occurrence. So if you have somebody who doesn't necessarily have proper coverage or doesn't even carry coverage, that can actually fall back on the house of worship's liability policy if you have the hired and non-owned liability. So if you choose not to do those things, it doesn't mean you're not acceptable, but those are questions that do come up. And then the last item is age of acceptable drivers. The standard for commercial policies varies amongst carriers, but it's typically age 22 through 25. So no younger than 22, and some carriers no younger than 25 on a regular basis. And so just make sure when you do have people wanting to help out, you understand what some of those implications are. So that's not to say the age is not built into the policy. So what that means is even if you did have a 16 or 17-year-old driving and you may have forgot to disclose that, it doesn't mean coverage wouldn't be there. But if a claim does occur and you have a youthful driver under whatever age limit they set as acceptable, that can impact any future insurance going forward. They may either non-renew you or cancel you midterm for that material fact not being shared and a claim actually occurring from it. And then lastly, overall, just your maintenance and care for vehicles. If you have older vehicles, what is your maintenance plan around that? So very similar to the property side.
Speaking of,
and now we'll jump in.
Well, hold on.
Sorry, go ahead,
Stephanie. Okay, speaking of maintenance, we have a question jumping back to the roof conversation or that you mentioned. Regarding roofs, Are steel shingles better for insurance rates over asphalt?
So from a rate perspective, that really does not come into play unless you are in what are called wind hail states. So if you're in the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, where you have significant amount of hailstorms come through, it won't necessarily impact your pricing positively, but what it can help is actually reduce your deductible, because in those states you have anywhere from a 2% wind hail deductible to 10% wind hail deductible. So based on what the rating is for those steel roofs can help reduce down your deductible, but it may not positively impact your pricing.
All right, thank you.
No problem. So then how can I get the best pricing? This is 90% of where I spend my discussion points is what can I do to reduce my costs, because this can a lot of times be one of the largest line items in any budget for a house of worship. And I'm very cognizant, very aware of that. So if you take anything away today is hopefully some of this information can help you in those negotiations and those discussions with your current broker and carrier. And some of this may be redundant, but that is the nature of the business as well. So if you're able to control your losses, you control your pricing. So if you have good experience over a long period of time, carriers offer loss-free discounts all the time and or experience credits. If your pricing is above a certain threshold and you have positive claims experience, and when I say positive claims experience, that means 50% or less is paid out for every dollar you paid into insurance. So hypothetically, if you pay $10,000 a year in insurance over a long period of time, 5 years, you paid in $25,000 if it stayed consistent. If you can maintain your losses below that $12,500 threshold, that can positively impact your pricing, because anything above 50% carriers almost view as breaking even in the risk game. So they have expenses included in there. So the more you're able to mitigate that, the more you're able to control your pricing. And then risk transfer, being able to transfer that liability onto as many people as possible can definitely help you control your losses, because you're essentially doing the verification up front and passing that claim on to whoever you hired to do the work. And so it kind of goes hand in hand with controlling your losses, control your pricing, and being able to transfer that to as many people as possible. Maintenance and updates. Again, roof is the primary factor for acceptability. A lot of carriers are starting to implement, they won't take on new business if the roof of the building is more than 20 years old, because that for a long period of time was the single largest loss in any house of worship program amongst the 10 carriers we work with who do insure houses of worship. So that is a common question still asked to this day. And then the other item is unoccupied buildings. Sometimes houses of worship are gifted facilities from their members who may have inherited it or passing it along at their end of life. And so unoccupied buildings becomes important to understand what you are doing with those. Are you maintaining the heat to prevent any potential frozen pipes and or water damage? And then what security systems do you have in place to prevent any potential vandalism as well? So understanding what you're doing to maintain and control those unoccupied buildings is equally as important as well. All right, sorry, that was a duplicate slide. And then marketing and quoting your business. What I always say is you have to select an agent that fits for you. Not all agents are made up the same way. So it's making sure you're doing business with somebody you trust and you like, who also you feel is getting you a competitive price. Loyalty can equal better pricing. So as I spoke about the experience rating, the longer you stay with the carrier and understanding what that looks like, the more you can benefit from that if you have positive claims experience. But the area I always recommend, even though loyalty can equal better pricing, having a regular selective marketing process done every 2 to 3 years. I'm not going to recommend every single year. I know some people out there say that, But coming from the carrier side, if you are marketing your house of worship every single year, statistics actually show your rates on average are 7% higher than those who don't regularly shop every single year. So if you bump that up to 2 or 3 years, and I lean towards 3 years to understand what the marketplace is doing, that can possibly impact your pricing. You may be saying I'm crazy, and why is that? So just full disclosure, as an underwriter, if I saw the same risk every single year, year in and year out, I'd be asking the agent I worked with, saying, what's changed? Because I just quoted it last year, quoted it the year before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time and energy if I know that account is just simply trying to find the lowest price. So come year 3, 4, and 5, as an underwriter, I'm going to say, I appreciate the opportunity. However, if nothing has changed and you're just trying to find the lowest price, I'm not even going to work on it. So you start to reduce what your option for markets are if you do consistently shop every single year. But in that same breath, every 2 to 3 years, you can find out and understand what new carriers are out there and what new coverages are out there as well. So those are some recommendations to help you get a better price, the best price possible for the coverages you're looking for. And then proper systems and protocols, depending on the size of your not-for-profit organization, can really depend as to how detailed you want to go with this, and if you have a risk management department. But always validating your new hires and volunteers, especially those working directly with minors, is vitally important in today's environment. I can't continue to stress that enough, as we continue to see things come up almost every single day in this realm. So the more you can do to understand who is interacting with your members, the better off you will be. And then also doing regular checks to make sure nothing has changed. We all think we know everyone as close as possible. However, doing these added steps can definitely help take it to another level in protecting your members through this process. And then, so just doing it at the time of hire, or the time they want to start volunteering, is great. And I will say you are ahead of what most, 70% or more of nonprofits already are not doing. So you'd be ahead of the game doing that. But an added step is doing a regular background check on an annual basis, because things can change and do change. And so those are just some tips and tricks as to how you're able to hopefully get some of the best pricing possible for the members in your house of worship. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We do have one more here. Lois says that they're constructing a new church building in Iowa, including a sprinkler system and some other fire safety measures. Will that help with insurance coverage? They previously had a 120-year-old building that was insured. So I think she's just trying to figure out how will that help with the new church building.
Yeah, so definitely having a sprinklered facility is a great step in the right direction. Just making sure your contractor that you're working with understands what the use of the building is going to be, and they're working with the local fire department to understand what type of system you actually need. That's where you can run into trouble. It's great you're taking that step. So it will definitely help to reduce your cost. So we talk in terms of what's called net rate. So I'm guessing your 120-year-old facility was probably paying around 20 cents to 25 cents per $100 of coverage on the property side. What you can expect if the sprinkler system is constructed properly, you could see that potentially coming down to 8 cents to 10 cents per $100 of coverage. So in cents, it would almost be cutting your property premium in half.
Okay. I have another one here. Do you recommend sharing your premium or keeping it confidential to get the best rate when shopping around?
So I always recommend to clients, please provide me a range. Give me a range as what is expected. And the reason I say that is I don't need to know what your exact pricing is, because you don't want to have agents in the situation where I'm just going to get $500 less and hope I do better. But if you provide a range, the biggest thing is you don't want to waste their time or your time. So if you're not giving a range, that agent is going to be coming to you with multiple applications for you to fill out to get pricing from different carriers. If you provide a range, carriers are often willing to provide a ballpark quote to say, okay, I can compete. Now, if you want me to be really competitive, I need this additional information. So it comes down to time management. And if you have the time to do that, you don't have to provide the pricing. But the best situation is to provide a range of where your premiums may be. It can be a $5,000 range, it can be a $1,000 range, whatever you want it to be.
Okay. Well, that looks like all the questions we have for right now. Feel free to still go ahead and type your questions in as you have them. Luke, thank you so much. This was really amazing, great stuff today. How, if anyone later on they have a question, a follow-up question, or maybe somebody who's watching this later on, how can they connect with you if they have more questions?
Yeah, sure. The best way to get a hold of me is via email. And I didn't put that on the slide, but I'd be happy to and share those with Stephanie again. But my email is lshipp, SHIPP, at first, the word, insurancegrp.com.
Okay. So again, thank you so much for sharing with us. I know some people are like, insurance, oh, but other people are like, no, insurance, we really need to know what we're talking about. So thank you so much for being willing to talk about this. And you made it very interesting, very relatable. It made it very interesting, just able to understand what we're looking at here. So thank you very much, Luke.
No problem. Happy to help. Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right. Thanks to everyone for attending. Don't forget to check out our podcasts and subscribe to our newsletter so that you can discover more ways in which to grow your ministries. And also, our conference and expo this year is registration will be opening soon. We will hope to see you in Dallas this September 21st and 22nd. So keep an eye out for that. If you do subscribe for, you can subscribe for news on the conference side of things, and you can find out when that comes. You can be one of the first to know. So, all right. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.